Have you ever just stopped and thought about how wild it is that the English language, it's like this constantly moving target, right? I mean, all these idioms and slang terms and just the sheer variety of ways people can say the same thing.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredible, really. It's going
Yeah.
to be both exciting and, yeah, a little bit overwhelming, especially if you're trying to learn the language,
Mm,
get a good handle on it.
for sure. So we figured let's help you out a little bit today. We're taking a deep dive into some of those more intriguing, I guess you could say, parts of the English language.
Yeah.
And specifically, we're going to dissect 4 terms that popped up in your sources this week.
And we're not just going to, define them. We're going to really dig in. How do you use them in a conversation? Where do they come from? Why do we even still use them?
Yeah.
So our 4 contenders today are the idiom roll with the punches. Then we've got a bit of British slang. Grotty, can't forget our phrasal verbs. This time it's back down. And we'll wrap things up with a word that's super handy in all sorts of situations, hypotheticals.
All right, so let's jump right in with roll with the punches. That one kind of paints a picture in your head, doesn't it? I mean, it sounds like it's straight out of a boxing match, and that's actually exactly where it comes from.
You got it. When you hear roll with the punches, yeah, you're thinking about a boxer literally rolling with a punch to lessen the impact, so they don't get knocked out.
Right. And what's interesting is how that very physical image then gets used to describe how we deal with all kinds of challenges in life, not just getting hit in the ring.
It's true. It's become this powerful metaphor for resilience and adaptability.
Mm-hmm.
When someone tells you to roll with the punches, they're not saying just stand there and take the hits. It's about being flexible, adjusting to whatever life throws your way and not letting it completely knock you down.
So let's say you've planned out your day, down to the minute, and then bam, something completely unexpected happens. Your whole schedule's out the window now. Are you going to freak out or are you going to roll with the punches? Find a new way to get things done.
It's all about mindset, isn't it? And that's a big part of what this idiom conveys. It's not about passively enduring tough times, but about taking an active role in navigating them by being adaptable.
And one of your sources had a really good example of this. It said, after losing his job, Mark learned to roll with the punches and started his own business. I mean, talk about a curveball, losing your job. But instead of letting it defeat him, he rolled with it and found a new path.
Exactly. It's a brilliant illustration of how this idiom captures that spirit of turning a setback into an opportunity, and it reflects a certain cultural value. You often see in English-speaking societies this idea of being resourceful and resilient.
It's like that famous saying, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it's worth noting that there are other ways to express this same idea. You could say, hang in there, or go with the flow, even keep your chin up. All these phrases capture that sense of resilience in the face of adversity.
All right, well, let's shift gears a bit and head over to the UK for our next term, grotty. This one's got a bit more, well, I'd say personality to it. So what exactly does grotty mean?
Oh, grotty is a classic piece of British slang, and it's used to describe something that's unpleasant or dirty or just generally low quality, like a rundown building or a dingy old bathroom.
It's like when something's so bad, it's almost comical, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember reading that grotty really started to gain popularity in the 1960s during the whole British invasion. And even George Harrison from the Beatles used it in that film, A Hard Day's Night.
Yeah, that's right. And when a word gets used by someone like a Beatle, it tends to catch on. So imagine you're on a trip and you check into your hotel room and it's just awful. The carpet's stained, the furniture's falling apart, the whole place smells musty. You could definitely call that room grotty.
Ugh, yeah, that's a perfect example. And speaking of perfect examples, one of your sources had a sentence that really nailed it. It said, the hotel room was so grotty that we decided to check out early. I mean, you can practically feel the disappointment and disgust, right?
You really can.
Yeah.
And to remember this word, think about how similar it sounds to grotesque. They both have that negative connotation of something being really awful or unpleasant.
That's a good tip. And if you're looking for some other words that have a similar vibe, you could also use shabby or dismal or even grungy. They all capture that sense of something being not quite right.
All right, well, let's move on to our phrasal verb now. Back down. What's the gist of this one?
Back down is all about retreating from a position or a stance you've taken, like giving in during an argument or withdrawing a demand you were making. It often happens when you're facing some sort of pressure or opposition.
Right. It's like saying, okay, you win. I'm not fighting this anymore. You often see this in situations involving conflict. Whether it's a disagreement between two people, negotiation that's gone sour, or even a company facing backlash from the public.
Yeah, like imagine there's this heated debate going on, maybe about a new policy that's been implemented,
Mhm.
and one person has been really vocal about their opposition, but then they start to realize maybe they don't have as much support as they thought, or the evidence just isn't on their side, so they decide to back down to avoid making things worse.
It's a good example, and it highlights how back down isn't always about admitting you were wrong. Sometimes it's more about choosing the most strategic course of action, recognizing when it's better to yield than to keep pushing forward.
One of the sources actually gave a really good real-world example of this. It said, the company had to back down from its tough stance after receiving numerous complaints from customers. So even though they initially held a firm position, public pressure forced them to reconsider.
Exactly. It shows how back down can be used to describe how both individuals and organizations respond to pressure and opposition. It can be a powerful tool for de-escalating conflict and finding a way forward.
And if you're trying to remember this phrasal verb, just picture someone literally taking a step back, like
Yep.
physically creating distance from a confrontation. That image really captures the essence of back down.
It really does. And you could also use words like withdraw or yield, even capitulate, which is a more formal way of saying you're surrendering completely.
Awesome. Well, let's tackle our last term now, hypothetical. This is one you'll hear pretty often, especially in more academic or analytical settings. So what does it actually mean?
Hypothetical is all about things that are imagined or theoretical, things that are not necessarily true but are being explored as possibilities. It's like saying what if and then proposing a scenario that doesn't actually exist but could.
Right. It's all about exploring possibilities and potential outcomes without being limited by what's actually happening. It's a crucial part of critical thinking and problem solving.
Absolutely. And you see it all the time in science philosophy planning, even everyday conversations, like when you're brainstorming ideas or trying to make a decision. Being able to think hypothetically allows us to consider different perspectives and weigh potential consequences.
Yeah. For example, let's say you're trying to figure out the best way to handle a tricky situation at work. You might say something like, okay, in a hypothetical scenario where I do this, well, what could happen? But what if I tried this other approach instead? You're basically playing out different scenarios in your mind to see which one leads to the best outcome.
Exactly. And a good way to solidify the meaning of hypotheticals is to connect it to the word hypothesis. Both words are rooted in that idea of exploring something that hasn't been proven yet.
That's a helpful connection. And there are some other words that have a similar meaning, like speculative or theoretical or conjectural. They all relate to that idea of considering possibilities that aren't necessarily grounded in reality.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that understanding these different types of words, whether they're idioms, slang phrasal verbs, or just essential vocabulary words, is super important for mastering the English language. It's about more than just knowing definitions. It's about being able to use these words effectively in real-life situations.
And it gives you a much deeper understanding of how English speakers communicate, how we express ourselves, the nuances of the language, the cultural influences, all of that.
Exactly. So now you've got 4 new tools in your linguistic toolbox.
Yeah.
You can roll with the punches when things get tough, describe something unpleasant as grotty back down from an argument gracefully, and explore all sorts of possibilities using hypotheticals.
Right. And as you continue on your English language journey, remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Don't be afraid to experiment with new words and phrases, make mistakes, learn from them, and most importantly, have fun with it.
That's the key. And hopefully this deep dive has sparked your curiosity.
Mhm.
There's so many other fascinating idioms, slang terms, and phrasal verbs out there just waiting to be explored. So keep learning, keep exploring, and keep rolling with those linguistic punches.
Who knows, maybe you'll even come across a new word that perfectly captures that feeling of walking into a truly grotty hotel room.
Or maybe you'll invent your own slang term that becomes the next big thing.
No, that would be something, wouldn't it? All right, that's all for today's deep dive. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.